The silent daughter. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Meadowbrook Elementary School, casting golden patterns across the polished floors. Sarah Mitchell stood in the hallway, her worn leather bag slung over one shoulder, watching students stream past her toward their classrooms. Their laughter echoed off the walls, a sound that usually brought her joy. But today, her mind was elsewhere. Sarah had been teaching 5th grade for 7 years now. She loved her job, even though the pay barely covered her rent in a small apartment across town. She drove an old Honda that sputtered every morning, and her clothes came mostly from thrift stores. But none of that mattered when she saw a child's eyes light up with understanding, when a struggling student finally grasped a difficult concept. Today, however, she faced a challenge unlike any she had encountered before. Emma Harrison sat in the back corner of Sarah's classroom, her eyes fixed on the desk in front of her. The girl was 11 years old, with long dark hair that fell like a curtain around her face. She wore expensive clothes, designer shoes that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly grocery budget. Everything about Emma spoke of wealth and privilege. Emma's father, Robert Harrison, was the CEO of Harrison Technologies, one of the largest tech companies in the state. His face appeared regularly in business magazines and on the news. The Harrison family lived in a mansion on the hill overlooking the town, a place Sarah had only seen from a distance while driving past. But money could not solve every problem. Emma Harrison had not spoken a single word at school in 3 months. Not to her classmates, not to other teachers, not to the school counselor. She completed her written work perfectly, her test scores were exceptional, but her voice remained locked away inside her. The school had tried everything. The principal had called in specialists. Robert Harrison had hired private therapists who charged hundreds of dollars per hour. They diagnosed it as selective mutism, a condition where a child capable of speech becomes unable to speak in certain situations. But knowing the name of the problem did not make it disappear. Sarah had watched Emma carefully during those 3 months. She noticed things others might have missed. The way Emma's shoulders relaxed slightly during art class. How her fingers drummed softly on her desk when Sarah read aloud from their current novel. The brief flicker of a smile when another student made a joke. Emma was still there, still present. She was simply trapped behind an invisible wall. One afternoon, after the other students had left for lunch, Sarah knelt beside Emma's desk. The girl tensed immediately, her hands gripping the edge of her chair. "Emma," Sarah said quietly, "I'm not going to ask you to talk. I just want you to know that I see you. I see how hard you work on your assignments. I see that you're listening, even when others might think you're not. And I want you to know that's enough for now." Emma's eyes lifted slowly to meet Sarah's. For just a moment, something flickered there. Relief, perhaps. Or gratitude. Sarah continued, "My grandmother used to tell me that words are only one way to communicate. She said sometimes the most important things are said without any words at all." She placed a small journal on Emma's desk. It had a blue cover with silver stars. "You don't have to write in this if you don't want to," Sarah said. "But if you ever feel like you have something to say, and you can't say it out loud, maybe you could write it here. Just for yourself. You don't have to show anyone." Then Sarah stood and walked away, leaving Emma alone with the journal. Days passed. Emma continued her silence. But Sarah noticed the journal was no longer sitting untouched on the corner of Emma's desk. It had moved. It was being used. Sarah changed her teaching approach. She started incorporating more activities that did not require verbal participation. Art projects, written reflections, silent reading time with opportunities to respond through drawings or written notes. She never singled Emma out, never made her feel different from the other students. Other teachers questioned her methods. The principal suggested she was being too soft, too accommodating. But Sarah had learned long ago that sometimes the gentlest approach was the strongest one. 2 months after she had given Emma the journal, something remarkable happened. It was a Tuesday morning, gray and drizzly. Sarah was reading aloud from their class novel, a story about a girl who discovered a secret garden. The classroom was quiet except for Sarah's voice and the soft patter of rain against the windows. Sarah reached a particularly emotional passage where the main character finally found the courage to enter the garden she had been afraid of for so long. As Sarah read the words, she noticed Emma leaning forward in her seat, completely absorbed. When Sarah finished the chapter, she closed the book and asked the class, "What do you think the garden represents? What is the author really trying to tell us?" Hands shot up around the room. Students offered their interpretations. The garden was freedom. The garden was hope. The garden was facing your fears. Sarah called on several students, encouraging the discussion. She glanced at Emma, who was staring at her journal, her pencil moving rapidly across the page. After class, as students filed out for recess, Emma remained in her seat. She tore a page from her journal, folded it carefully, and placed it on Sarah's desk before hurrying out of the room. Sarah unfolded the note with trembling hands. In careful, precise handwriting, Emma had written, "The garden is a place where you can finally be yourself. Where you don't have to pretend anymore. Where it's safe." Sarah pressed the note to her chest, her eyes stinging with tears. The next day, Sarah brought in gardening supplies. Small pots, soil, seeds for flowers and herbs. She announced to the class that they would be starting a classroom garden project. Each student would plant their own seeds, care for them, watch them grow. Emma chose lavender seeds. Sarah helped her fill the pot with soil, showed her how deep to plant the seeds, how much water they needed. "My grandmother grew lavender," Sarah said softly as they worked side by side. She said it was the plant of peace and healing. She said sometimes when you can't find the words, the smell of lavender can say what you need to say. Emma's hands stilled for a moment. Then she continued pressing the tiny seeds into the dark soil. Weeks passed. The classroom garden flourished. Green shoots pushed up through the soil, reaching toward the sunlight. Emma tended her lavender plant every day, watering it carefully, turning the pot so all sides received equal light. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, Emma began to change. It started small. A nod when another student asked her a question. A smile when someone complimented her growing lavender. A gentle touch on Sarah's arm when she wanted to show her something in her journal. Then, one morning in late spring, as the lavender plant burst into bloom and filled the classroom with its delicate scent, something extraordinary happened. Sarah was helping another student with a math problem when she heard it. A voice she had never heard before, quiet and slightly uncertain, but clear as a bell. "Miss Mitchell, can you help me measure my plant? I want to record how tall it's grown." The entire classroom fell silent. Every head turned toward the back corner where Emma stood beside her desk, her cheeks flushed pink, her hand resting on her lavender plant. Sarah walked slowly toward Emma, afraid that any sudden movement might break the spell. "Of course, Emma," she said, her voice steady despite the emotion flooding through her. "I would be honored to help you." They measured the plant together. 15 inches tall, Emma carefully recorded in her journal. Then she looked up at Sarah with eyes that were no longer hiding. "Thank you," Emma whispered. "For waiting." Sarah knelt down so they were eye to eye. "Thank you for trusting me enough to speak." By the end of that school year, Emma was participating fully in class. Her voice was still soft, still careful, but it was there. She read aloud during reading circle. She answered questions. She even laughed with the other students. On the last day of school, Robert Harrison came to pick up Emma. He stood in the classroom doorway, watching his daughter chat with her friends, listening to the sound of her voice. When Emma ran to him, talking excitedly about her summer plans, Sarah saw tears streaming down his face. Before they left, he approached Sarah. "The therapists I hired, the specialists, the experts," he said, shaking his head. "They all had credentials, impressive degrees. But you," he paused, his voice breaking slightly, "you had something they didn't. You had patience. You had belief. You gave her time." Sarah smiled. "I just gave her what every child needs. A safe place to grow." Emma turned back from the doorway and ran to Sarah one last time. She pressed something into her teacher's hand. It was a small packet of lavender seeds. "So you can grow your own," Emma said. "So you'll remember." Sarah closed her fingers around the seeds. "I could never forget." As she watched Emma leave, walking hand in hand with her father, Sarah thought about all the ways people communicate. Through words and silence. Through gestures and patience. Through gardens that grow in classrooms and walls that slowly come down. Sometimes, she realized, the most impossible things become possible when you simply stop trying to force them, and instead create the space for them to bloom on their own.